The Galicia Jewish Museum is an amazing place. Established in April 2004, its core collection is a photographic exhibition titled Traces of Memory, which is a contemporary look at the Jewish past in Poland. It is one of the first such exhibitions in Poland. But the entire museum has many brilliant exhibits, and they all serve to make thousands of people aware not only of the Jewish world that was destroyed by the Holocaust, but also of the efforts being made to preserve the memory of it, and of Polish Jewish culture in present-day Poland. During the course of producing my film about the Holocaust and genocide, as seen through the works of Jacques Semelin, I have met an extraordinary number of people and institutions. We recently completed principal filming at the Auschwitz death camp in Poland, which is a mere 30-minute drive from Krakow. It was in Krakow that I had the opportunity to meet with Dr. Edyta Gawron, who is a professor at the Department of Jewish Studies in Jagiellonian University in Krakow. She is also president of the management board, which supports the Galicia Jewish Museum in Krakow. You'll meet with her shortly, but first, just a few words about the museum and Polish history. Jewish and non-Jewish, young and old, now pass through the museum's doors each year, and the museum has become an integral part of both the Polish and the Jewish cultural landscape of Krakow. The museum also maintains one of the most extensive bookstores in Europe, with hundreds of volumes on the Holocaust and Jewish studies in multiple languages. But what most impressed me was that the museum constantly contemplates the role of the Jewish museum in a contemporary world, in a digital age, in a COVID age, in a post-COVID age. And with the continuing war in Ukraine, prompting millions to flee their homes, the museum knows it has a role to play. Since the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, over 150,000 refugees arrived in Krakow, a city of about 900,000 inhabitants. And there are about 3 million Ukrainians who have resettled all across Poland. Jakub Nowakowski, who I met with, is the director of the museum. And he has noted in several press interviews that the role of Jewish museums in this time of crisis means they must assist where they can the refugees at all levels. The museum has been trying to help both refugees and people on the other side of the border since the beginning of the war. And this has included collecting funds, sending medical supplies into Ukraine, but also opening 2 daycare centers for Ukrainian children in Krakow. Those children and their parents needed much help. From the simple creation of a safe and welcoming space, to offering regular meals, to creating opportunities to play with pairs, to providing supplies, which included clothes and shoes, because most escaped in very heavy winter clothes, as well as to offer medical support and offering classes in English and Polish. And obviously all of this was a great aid to giving them some psychological therapy. And the museum is also trying to help by providing paid jobs. As Jacob recently noted, because this is the right thing to do, because we have tools and means to do so, because we have been teaching about the danger of being indifferent, because what we do doesn't change our mission. It is only the tools that we use, the actions that we take. They are new. And as he continued, but the story isn't just about doing good or doing wrong. It's about making sure that the mission of the museum is held front and center. Jacob and the museum stand on the pinnacle of honor and respect, and it is a difficult road. The influx of Ukrainian refugees is driving up rents across Poland, and there is a scarcity of apartment rentals in major Polish cities. And you cannot host guests forever. And Polish solidarity with Ukrainian refugees has created tensions. But that's an issue I will address in another video in this series. And when you undertake a film project such as mine, you are gripped both by past history and by current events, that which we face every day. I have been gripped by the flood of testimony that I have read about the Holocaust. by the present war in Ukraine and by the rising anti-Semitism in both America and in Europe. But I learned quite quickly that anyone who researches the history of Jews will sooner or later experience a moment of similarly heart-stopping resonance. When I was reading the book In the Midst of Civilized Europe, which concerns the Jewish pogroms of 1918 to 1921 and the onset of the Holocaust, there was Ukraine on a map on the inside cover. Reading this book in 2022 makes it impossible not to contemplate the significance of place. The Holocaust was a European phenomenon with many different starting points, and the author of that book has produced a riveting and nuanced account of developments in one very specific location, the area claimed by the Ukrainian People's Republic in the aftermath of the First World War. It is why my visit to the museum was incredibly poignant vis-a-vis my film and my study of history. It was at the museum that I picked up a copy of a book by Czesław Miłosz, the world-renowned poet and Nobel laureate. The book is entitled The Captive Mind, which was published in 1953. I had read his book To Begin Where I Am, which is the most comprehensive selection of his best essays. But The Captive Mind was different. It remains possibly the best book ever written about the lure and trap of totalitarian societies and ideologies. The rewards of the book begin with its epigraph, which he attributes to an old Jew of Galicia. And he says, "When someone is honestly 55% right, that's very good, and there's no use wrangling. And if someone is 60% right, it's wonderful. It's great luck. Let him thank God. But what's to be said about 75% right? Wise people say this is suspicious. Well, and what about 100% right? Whoever says he's 100% right is a fanatic, a thug, and the worst kind of rascal." Where Miłosz found this epigraph, I cannot say. But it resonates today, in large part because the old Jew he quotes is from Galicia, the medieval name for a region stretching from eastern Poland to western Ukraine, whose principal city, Lviv, is now overflowing with refugees fleeing a scorched earth invasion ordered by a 21st century fanatic claiming to be 100% right. And so now, onto my chat with Professor Gawron, in which we spoke about her career, the museum, Galicia, Jewish studies, and the Holocaust.
We're right now in Galicia Jewish Museum, a museum based in Kazimierz, the Jewish quarter of Krakow. It was established by Chris Schwartz and Jonathan Weber, Professor Jonathan Weber, British citizens who devoted part of their professional life to documenting Jewish history in the area known as Galicia. I'm here because of my involvement in the museum. After Chris's death, his passing away, we, together with a group of friends, continue his work, and right now I'm on the board of the foundation that runs the museum. And we are devoted to extending the museum and continuing the work of not just commemorating the Jewish life in Galicia, but also we pay tribute to the victims of the Holocaust in the region, and we are devoted to the education and research and all projects that might be of value for local people, but also visitors, international visitors coming to Krakow. This museum, this particular museum, Galicia Jewish Museum, is focusing on the photographic evidence of the past and photographic evidence of the contemporary situation. And that's how it started, with the photography, with the photographic documentation of the history and the current state of Holocaust sites, of genocide sites, of Jewish life sites. And of course it developed. We we soon understood, I mean, as the museum team, that it requires a little bit more information. The narrative of each picture has to be carefully crafted, has to be carefully written to give information, basic facts, and give possible interpretations of the evidence of the documentation of the photography or other parts of the exhibitions. So it developed. Each exhibition is different, each program, each project is different. And of course, right now we are in the exhibition that focuses on just 10 biographies from 10 different cities, but they are carefully selected from many thousands of stories showing the history of Polish Jews. So it's in a sense picking up the stories that speak to people, picking up the documents that have value, historical value, but they can be also understood by the average visitor. It's important because we are aware of other documentation. We have also other types of documentation, but we are focusing on the audience, on the visitors, on the educational meaning of every single exhibition here. That's why the main exhibition in Galicia Jewish Museum, it's traces of memory. It's traces of the past as seen through various places. Cemeteries, Jewish cemeteries, Jewish prayer houses, Jewish symbols visible in various locations. But one of my favorite pictures is the picture that ends the exhibition. It's the picture from the small town of Dobra. And there's nothing Jewish in the picture. It's like a random landscape. There is no documentation of anything Jewish, one can say. But this was the picture taken by the founder of the museum, Chris Schwartz, when he couldn't find any remnant of the past. And he said, this void, this emptiness is the trace. Because it documents the process of erasing traces. So even if we do not see any traces, even if we do not see any evidence, even if there is no documentation, it doesn't mean that the place, the person, the event, or whatever else is not connected to the Holocaust. We just have to dig deeper. We need to search, we need to find out the story. And I think this is the mission of the museum, to inspire people to dig, to find their own story. And I'm really moved by many young students who come to visit the museum. They see photographs from their hometowns, they get back to their hometowns, and they start to open their eyes to all these small elements. And very often we receive some messages. We found this, we found that, we learned that somebody remembers the story. And that's how the knowledge about the Jewish history and the Holocaust and Jewish life today is being spread, it's being disseminated around not just Galicia, not just Poland, but all around the world, because we show the exhibitions all around the world, literally. Right now we show one of the exhibitions in Japan. Another exhibition is in the United States. So it helps people to get connected to very often their ancestors, their part of their family story that they were not fully aware of. I'm a historian, and I narrowed my interest to Jewish history, especially contemporary history of the 20th century in Poland. And I think one of the first triggers, the reasons why I started focusing on that was discovering that in my hometown, the history of the local Jewish community was completely unknown. It was like a taboo topic. It was not really mentioned in any textbook, any historical book. So I was shocked as a teenager that this part of the history is forgotten, and I took it upon myself to write the history of the local Jews, and that's what I did. And it was like the first step to getting involved into the Jewish history and focusing on that. I think the most important scholarship that I experienced, I received the postdoctoral scholarship at Yad Vashem. It was right after my PhD studies, and spending time at Yad Vashem, studying together with worldwide known scholars like Yehuda Bauer, Israel Gutman, David Bankir, Dan Michman, was a life-changing experience. And I've learned a lot, I've seen a lot, heard a lot, and also it formed me as a scholar. It was not only the research, the methodology of the research, the approach to the research, but I think it was also important how they approached young scholars. They were very accomplished professors with a number of books, but they were still eager to learn more things, new things. And they valued the new approach, the new methods, the new perspective of young scholars who were attending the seminars at Yad Vashem. So I think it was one of the most important, very forming experiences in my scholarship. Of course, another thing was knowing better the Israeli historiography and Israeli perspective of doing research on the Holocaust, commemorating Holocaust, and Yad Vashem was a very specific place to work in and to work on, in some sense. Using the archives, having access to all the documentation, and having enormous support in reaching out to people, getting the books that I needed. It was really, really important. When I could compare the experience at Yad Vashem and the Holocaust Memorial Museum, I see wider approach to the Holocaust, focusing not only on Holocaust as the genocide, but Holocaust as one of the genocides. And a little bit more approach to contemporary anti-Semitism. That's also important. So teaching Holocaust, for example, doing research on the Holocaust, it's not just focusing on the history, but trying to look at it through the lenses of contemporary events, contemporary threats, contemporary society. So it's more like trying to take a lesson from the past in understanding the mechanism today and trying to prevent what happened in the past. I think there are various factors that should be discussed when we talk about the survivors and their attitude to talking about the experience. I think it's the time when they started to talk and when they didn't talk. It's also the environment, it's social changes, it's the country, it's the type of democracy or the lack of democracy around them. So many of the survivors also changed their location. It had some impact on their story. Of course, we can talk about various countries. I will focus on Poland. We are in Poland, so I would like to focus on Poland. After the Holocaust, survivors who were coming back or coming out of hiding, they didn't know what to expect. You know, it was the new Poland after the war, new kind of regime, communist around, and survivors didn't want to talk about their experience, didn't want to talk about their Jewish identity, even, because they were afraid of the consequences, so they kept silent. It was easier for them, I mean, not easier maybe, but safer for them to keep silent, not to uncover their story, their identity, unless they felt comfortable enough to share it. So this was one reason. Another reason was there was no time for that. There was no time to discuss it because they wanted to organize their new life. They had to find the shelter, they had to find work, they had to take care of the children if they survived. So there was no time to think about the past and discuss it. Because thinking about the past, they were focusing on the nightmares, on the difficult time, and they were looking ahead. They wanted to focus on the bright future rather than on the dark past. When Schindler's List was filmed in Krakow in 1993, 1992, 1993, many survivors who still lived here, they started to speak. And it was like coming out of the wardrobe of their memories, of their past. And I was trying to understand how it worked with them. And certainly some of them said that, before that, they didn't want to talk about their story because it was difficult, it was tragic, and nobody was ready for this story. But once Steven Spielberg was here and his crew started to interview the survivors, then they realized their story is important. It has the value. So suddenly their Holocaust experience was something precious, something that could be considered as their heritage, as their testimony, but also their last will, in a sense, for people to remember. So they opened up, and Tosia Zilberink was one of them. There were a few others who wrote their memories, books, and also tried to link their biography to the film. We have several women who were trying to recognize themselves in the story of the girl in the red dress, filmed, or the red coat, filmed in the movie. So certainly this was the trigger. But I would like to also look at it from different perspective, from the audience. The general audience, once watching the film, knew a little bit more about the Holocaust. Without Holocaust education in Poland, but also in other countries, people didn't know much. People knew about the Second World War. They probably knew that Jews in general were killed during the Second World War, but they didn't have the idea of the scale, of the mechanism, of how organized it was. So suddenly Schindler's List became like the first textbook, if I can use this comparison. The first basic information about the Holocaust. Maybe not the best one, but it was the first and eye-opening for millions of people. And we have to understand the scale of this movie. It was not just the group of local kids. It was millions of people all around the world who watched this movie and learned about the Holocaust. And then they wanted to hear the survivors. Suddenly, the people who were around the Schindler's List, even not on the list, but around Schindler's List, who were in Krakow, who were the survivors of the ghetto in Krakow, who were in Plaszów camp here, were the victims of the history, whose voice was important, whose testimony was important. Well, I'm an irrational optimist. So even if I see that the slogan, the lesson, never again, hasn't really worked in the past decades, I'm still a believer in the future. I mean, otherwise it would be difficult to work in the education. I think we should continue our work of educating people about the past, of understanding the human nature, of understanding politics, of understanding all the processes that led to catastrophes in countries and regions and in genocide in particular. Even today, I've been focusing more and more on fake news, on checking information. And this is one of the lessons from the past. You know, you cannot trust certain groups. You have to check the facts, check the numbers, check some information that you are being flooded with. And that's one of the elements today, especially when we see the situation in the eastern territories of Europe, situation between Ukraine and Russia today. You have to be careful absorbing information. You have to be resistant to any attempt of changing the history, of manipulating the facts, of calling one group, for example, neo-Nazis, when there is nothing about the group being called Nazis or neo-Nazis. So this is really the mechanism that we are trying to explain to young people. And I think this should be the focus of education today. Make people, young people especially, independent in their thinking and critical. Critical thinking is crucial because media create very often very easy way of getting what's around us. Young people have to be critical. They should be also aware of what is happening, not just in their countries, but other countries. And their knowledge should be inclusive. It's not just about us, it's also about others. And our conversation is about the Holocaust. I'm very often asked, why do we need to talk about the Holocaust all the time? It's enough about the Holocaust. Why it's all about the Jews? It's not about the Jews. It's not just about the Holocaust. It's about you. It's about other groups. In case of Poland, it's not about the Jews only, it's about the Poles. In Germany, it's not about the Jews, it's about the Germans. And in fact, German Jews as well. So talking about the Holocaust, talking about Jewish history, it's not just focusing on the Jews. It's talking about one part of the history that involved many nations, that involved many countries, and their attitude, their reaction to the Holocaust is a lesson. In fact, when talking about the Holocaust, I very often draw attention of my students or the audience to other genocides. So it's also teaching about the Holocaust. It's
making comparisons to.
It's not just making comparison. It's making comparison is one thing. It gives you the understanding of some repeated mechanism, but I think it's also drawing attention to other genocides that are very often forgotten. So of course, like in Poland, people have heard about the Holocaust, but did they hear about Armenian genocide? Did they fully acknowledge the genocide in Rwanda? Not really. So it's also it's an opportunity to talk about other examples of the genocide. And I think by absorbing this history, we understand that it's not just the local history. It's not just something, as people very often take it, that it's not something with the Jews. It's something about the perpetrators, about the nature of perpetrators, because it's very easy in the contemporary world to find the group that we label as the others, as the minority, as not us. And then the whole mechanism of stigmatization, of discrimination starts.
Dehumanization.
Yes. And we see it very often even in contemporary European countries. In Poland, it was recently the LGBT community or some national groups we cannot stigmatize people. We have to focus on tolerance. We have to focus on inclusive society, not excluding certain groups. I think that's the lesson from the Holocaust, one of the lessons.